Hi, this is PatZi with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who loves Detroit, because today I have a wonderful guest, special guest, Bill Moores, and we're going to be talking about The Lions Finally Roar. And it is the Ford family, the Detroit Lions, and the road to redemption in the NFL. And of course, it's a story also about Detroit because we both love Detroit and know a lot about it. And here he is. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Hello, Patsy. Good to see you again.
Oh, it's always great to see you.
Thank you.
I get such a thrill. I speak to all the big global best-selling authors of novels, but I get a big kick out of this book, which I've talked about all the time, and it's just so fantastic. You have captured so much of Detroit and so much of the joy that the Lions have given to us over the years. And a few
And the
heartaches.
agony. Don't forget the agony.
I was going to say a few heartaches, a little bit of agony.
There's been some agony over the years. Yeah, it's funny what you say about, you mentioned Detroit right off the bat. And as I was writing the book, Patsy, it's a football book. Yes, there's a lot of football in the book, but I thought of it more as a book about Detroit and the people of Detroit and the history of Detroit. And that gets you into cars, of course, but sports, of course, and music and architecture and race and politics. And all of that gets thrown into this mix. It's all swirling around the Lions and their fateful history, how terrible they were and how they got good again all of a sudden. But it's a book about Detroit and the people of Detroit as much as it's about the Lions and
This is what I tell people, and of course, everyone who knows me knows my obsession with the Detroit Lions, which goes back forever. And they'll say, "Oh, I don't like football," and I say, "Oh no, you don't understand. This is a book about Detroit. It You encompass it all, and mostly you encompass the fans because we are special people, people who can stay loyal to the Detroit Lions year after year. And wherever we are in the world, I could be in a foreign country, I could be in Istanbul, I could be in Rome. And when I'd meet an American, the first thing I'd say is, "How are the Lions doing?" And the people, so many times, every once in a while, I hit on a Lions fan, I'd get all these other people. What are the Lions? Who cares about? I said, "Oh, I do." Just,
of
it's
course.
just something special, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and like you say, the devotion of the fans is one of the great mysteries of life to me. I started going to games in the early 1960s when I was a boy. My father had season tickets, and as I write in the book, he ended up working as William Clay Ford Sr.'s executive assistant for a number of years. And my father told me a lot of stories about his time with Bill Ford and the Lions and the Ford Motor Company. And that I recorded those chats with my dad, and that was where the book started, really, for me. My father's personal knowledge of Mr. Ford and the Ford Motor Company and the Lions, and those personal memories blossomed into this book. But yeah, the Detroit Lions fans are a special animal. They've been through so many bad years, and I had the pleasure of meeting a lady, you may know her, Megan Stefanski. She was named NFL's Fan of the Year last year. She's the first woman ever to win it. And when I was doing my book tours in Michigan, I wound up visiting with her. She's a librarian in Detour, which is at the eastern tip of the Upper Peninsula. And I went all the way up there to do a little reading with some people from Detour. And she's the ultimate Detroit Lions fan, but there's hundreds of thousands of them out there, maybe millions, who are not quite as rabid as she is, but who are certainly have been through the thin years and are now, I think, quite excited about what's going on with the team right now. My father, he was working with Bill Ford, and when he bought the team, the day he bought the team and paid $6 million, which was an unheard of sum. I think the team is now worth $3 billion or so, but that's a pretty good return on your investment. Although, as I point out in the book, $6 million to $3 billion is nice, but the Lions are the second least valuable franchise in the NFL. I think second only to the Cincinnati Bengals, whereas the Dallas Cowboys are worth the most, which is not all that important. But that's like the economics of the sports world is certainly a part of this mix. And back when Bill Ford bought the team in 1962, It was a completely different world. The sport was different. The city was different. Everything was different back then.
But I've never seen a Bengals fan who gets really excited. They're not like Lions fans. We are a special breed. I think this shows
Absolutely.
our strength, our character, that we have never given up and we're enjoying what's happening here. Thanks so much to Sheila Ford, who has been behind the team, and the fans still love her for what she's done.
Oh yeah, she was, I think, the key to the whole turnaround story, which is happens at the end of the book, because I start with the 1930s when the team came to Detroit from Portsmouth, Ohio. But just in the past few years, she was the real linchpin that turned the team around and getting the right people in the right places and letting them do their jobs, which something her father was not known for. He was always meddling in the team and making decisions, and he had hired terrible general managers. And she hired a really brilliant guy and let him do his job, which is why I think the team has turned around and is respectable again. And maybe we don't know what's going to happen this year, but they look like they're going to be pretty darn good. I don't know.
I was listening to Drew Eisen, and he's got some nice predictions.
What do you say? What does he think?
He thinks it's looking good.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love his voice. I love his voice. I think the predictions are good, and it so much depends on spirit. But I know Sheila's going to be out there, and people like to see her.
There was a terrible story in the off season, as I'm sure you know, about Terrion Arnold, the cornerback. And it's funny because when I saw that, my eyes popped out when I saw the story about him being arrested. Because when I was doing the last bit of research for this book, I was in Detroit at the Lions training facility there in Allen Park, and I was going through photographs from their photo archive to pick out pictures for the book. And I was in the press room where they do the interviews and all, and the room suddenly filled up with all these reporters and guys with cameras and tape recorders, and they introduced their top draft pick from that 2024 draft, which I attended in Detroit, which was a great party, by the way. That was an amazing event. But they introduced Terrion Arnold from Alabama, the great, highly touted cornerback. And everybody was very high on him at that time. And it's just real sad to me that 2 years later, he's facing these terrible charges. And the team just cut him loose. He's gone. So the defensive backfield is a big question going into the season. And we'll see how Dan Campbell and those guys sort it out. But that was an amazing story, how a guy with so much promise and so young could screw it up so bad.
Yeah,
It happens in sports a lot. These young guys get a lot of money and they do some really stupid stuff. And they're young and they're full of juice and what's going to happen. But I was really sorry to see it happen to him because I thought he was going to be a great player. He'll probably get back with another team, and who knows, he might have a great career. But the Lions certainly didn't want any part of him after that.
I'm not sure. The players, some of them are very young. They seem a little bit immature compared to. I remember my father talking about Bobby Lane and all of these guys. They were also acted up, but they didn't seem so young.
Yeah, Bobby Lane, he he was known to take a drink, and he was a wild man. But he showed up on Sunday every week, and a lot of people think he was the greatest Lion of them all. And when they traded him, which was early in my story, a lot of people on the team were unhappy. A lot of people in the stands were unhappy with that trade. But I think that the coach just got tired of dealing with this wild man. I mean, he was really like Yale Larry, I think he was a defensive back, said, when Bobby Lane said block, you blocked. And when Bobby Lane said drink, you drank. Because he would be out running around Detroit all night with these guys. And he was a wild man. But it's a different world now. People can't get away with that stuff anymore. And they don't, most of them. That's one of the many ways that the game and the world have changed.
What's so wonderful about your book, and we mentioned it a little bit here at the beginning, that you bring so much in, including, I love, of course, the music. And so you were a young man during this period, the great Detroit music era.
Oh, yeah. And then Motown was going on in the 60s and the Grandy Ballroom and the East Point Theater. And it was just a wild time. Shows at Cobo. And that's such a big part of Detroit. And there was a funny little anecdote in the book that I didn't know about until I started doing the research. Marvin Gaye, the great sexy soul singer from Motown, dreamed of being a professional football player and actually got a tryout with the Lions when Joe Schmidt was coaching the team. And after a few looks at him, Joe said, Marvin, stick with singing. I think you'll do better at Motown than you'll do on the field at Tiger Stadium. So that never happened. But
Yeah,
that's
I'm
one of
glad. I'm glad because I can listen to Marvin Gaye every night. It's
we wouldn't want to see him get messed up on a football field. But
eh,
there's Detroit is full of stories like that, and
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 so
I,
is your
I tried to
book,
get as many of them as I
full of
could
full
into
of
the book, right?
stories. And of course, for Detroit, all we had to do is say the name Ford, and it encompasses so much of Detroit, the culture, not just the Lions, but the culture, the Detroit Institute of Art, all of the things that the Fords did for Detroit. It's really quite amazing.
Oh yeah, it really is. I think the DIA, the Institute of Arts, is and the Rivera murals, which Edsel, of course, oversaw and sponsored and paid for, is one of the great things about Detroit. And yeah, the Ford family is all over the place and still are today. Not only Sheila, but her brother Bill and the Central Station and all that, and the new Ford headquarters in Dearborn. Yeah, so the family is a big part of the story too. And I tried to get as much of that in as I could.
I think that's important that people know about it because for me, the Detroit Institute of Art was like it was like my second home. I spent so much time there. As a matter of fact, when I was in 12th grade, I played hooky a lot. I was mostly at the museum because it's really a world class museum that so many people have not seen because of the years where people didn't go to Detroit. And I hope that people get to see that museum.
Oh, yeah. And we should say a word of thanks to the people who preserved the collection when the bankruptcy happened. There was talk about breaking up the collection and selling it off to settle the city's debts, and they dodged that. And that was a great achievement that art collection is intact and available to the public like it still is. That would have been a real blow to the city, and I'm glad that they avoided that because that institution is just a central part of the whole city to me. And you, obviously, if you're playing hooky from high school to go there, you must have been a real nut.
I was, but high school sort of bored me. But I never got bored at the Institute of Art. It was just
Mhm.
amazing. And of course, all the other buildings. You mentioned the Cobo Center, the wonderful Fisher Theater, and all of this that you cover in the book too. You tell about it in such a nice way. Well, because you and your father and your family, you were part of Detroit, so you have this feel that I don't think anybody else could write a book like this with the sort of kind of joy that you have in this. And your
Right.
father, that you taped your father, what a treasure.
Yeah. I did it. He was about my current age, and I thought he's not going to be around much longer. I better get him down on tape because he'll be gone, and then I'll kick myself for not having gotten his stories down. And it wasn't just about his years in Detroit; it was his whole life. But I of course pulled out the parts about Detroit and the Lions and the Fords for my book's purposes. But yeah, that's something I would advise people my age to do before your parents are gone. Get their stories down. It's amazing. And I found that my father, once he got going, he loved talking about all the stuff that he'd been through, good and bad. And it was a great experience for both of us, really. And that was the germ of my book. It sat in a drawer for 20 years, and one day I picked it up and started reading it. And I thought, there's a book here, and that's how the Lions book came about. I'm glad I did that in retrospect.
It's turned out to be a treasure because now you have this wonderful book that this book is what we call an evergreen in the business. It's going to be selling forever. As
Well, I
long
hope
as
you're right.
there's, it'll be selling 50 years from now. You know,
Yeah,
those kind of books are very valuable to your family. They'll be thanking you for 50 years from now, your great
I
great
hope you're
grandkids,
right.
because they'll say, well, because I don't think the nature of the Lions fan will change. Once you're a Lions fan, you can move away, you can live on the other side of the world, and it doesn't go away. There's something, and so many things about it. I think the fact when they started the Thanksgiving Day games, that also it as a day of the year that you think of the Lions, no matter where you are. And even if, like, for the women like me, we didn't go to the games on Thanksgiving because we were home making mashed potatoes.
Yeah, cooking and doing the gravy, right?
That's right. But we were listening on the radio. And for the guys, they were having fun. And then they knew they were coming back to women who had worked all morning, all
Yeah,
slaving over a stove. But then we could talk about the Lions game.
yeah. The story is in the book, and I can't remember all the names of the guys, but when they inaugurated the Thanksgiving Day game back in the 1930s, it was a marketing tool because the Tigers were the big team in town, and professional football was not yet a big deal. College football was a much more popular sport. So the owner of the Lions had shot a bear up in the woods up north, and the Lions played the Chicago Bears in that first game at Briggs Stadium in Detroit on, I think it was 1937. I don't have it in front of me, but and he served the bear to the team after the game. And a friend of mine, Bill Dow, had interviewed one of the guys who's still alive who played on that team in 1937. He was an old guy, can't remember his name, but they ate the bear after the game. But Chicago won the game, and my friend Bill asked him, how did the bear taste? And he said, not so good. If we'd won the game, it might have tasted a lot better, but we lost. So they lost their very first Thanksgiving Day game to the Chicago Bears and had to eat bear afterward.
Even for a Uber, I don't know. I'm not going to eat a bear, but
No, I'm not going to eat any bear meat anytime soon myself.
no, no, absolutely not. But there were so many changes in the city, the ups, the downs during World War II, then the 50s and the 60s, and all that Bobby Lane stuff. By the way, the Lions, are any of them superstitious?
No, superstitions? No, not that I'm aware of. I'm sure they do. Athletes are highly superstitious people. They have rituals they have to go through before every game and the order they put their shoes on and all that kind of thing. Hockey players are probably the worst. But no, I'm not aware of any particular things on the Lions. Are you? Do you have us?
No, I'm
Do you
trying
know
to
something
find
I don't know?
out. I'm investigating right now.
Uh,
And you also the change in race relationship and in the game in general. That was also a big change.
Oh yeah, and the Lions had some great black players early on. The Tigers were the second slowest team to integrate in the major leagues in baseball. The Lions were a little bit ahead of them, not by much, but somewhat. And of course, over the years, once the black players started getting in the league, the Lions had some of the greats of all time: Lem Barney and Bobby Lane and Charlie Sanders and Megatron, and the list goes on and on. But it's hard to believe that the sport was once all white. But that's American history, and all that's in the book as well, because the nature of sports has changed so much on basis of improving race relations. But and the money and all that is just, it's a completely different world from what it was when the game started out in the 90s. At U of D Stadium, that's where the Lions played their first games. It's hard to believe it was almost 100 years ago.
Your writing is so good because, of course, you're a journalist and you've written other books. So tell us before we go, what books have you written?
I've written 6 books, 3 novels, 3 nonfiction. And my first book was a novel, a fiction called Motor City, oddly enough. And it was about, at the time, I was driving this beautiful 1954 Buick Special, red and black, beautiful car. And I got so interested in the car that I started researching the car stylist, because my dad used to take me down to Ford Styling when Bill Ford was doing the beautiful Mark II Continental, which is a part of the Lions story too. And I was always fascinated by car stylists. I thought those guys were artists, but they were commercial artists, and yet they were really wonderful draftsmen. And I started doing research about Detroit car studios in the 1950s, and I wove a story around the creation and the selling of this magical 54 Buick. And that was the novel Motor City. The second novel is called All Souls Day, and that also featured some Buicks, but it was set in Saigon during the Vietnam War in 1963, the year that the United States sponsored a coup in Saigon and overthrew the Diem brothers. And then 3 weeks later, John Kennedy was assassinated. And Robert McNamara, who was a president of Ford Motor Company before he became Secretary of Defense under Lyndon Johnson, not a lot of people know this, but in his memoir, which was published shortly after my novel All Souls Day came out, and this was really what my novel was about. And my novel came out shortly before McNamara's memoir, and he said in that book, after the coup in 1963, that's when we should have gotten out of Vietnam. And that was 55,000 dead people later. They finally got out in 1974. But McNamara just kept the war going, even though he knew it was not the thing to do. So that book was, I thought, a little bit I don't know if it was prescient was the word, but it was built on a premise that actually was true before I knew it was true. And that was that moment in 1963 was a pivotal moment in the war, and they should have gotten out. And then I published a memoir about my early years in newspaper work, and a book about my grandfather who was born. He was born into a slave owning family in during the Civil War, the summer of Gettysburg in 1863, and died when I was 3 years old in 1955. And I'd always been fascinated by his lifespan from the Civil War to the Cold War. He was born when there was no running water, no combustion engines, and he died after the atom bomb. And I thought, why not write a story about him and the life and the changes that he saw? And that book was called The Age of Astonishment. And it was a real labor of love because I don't remember him. He died when I was 3, as I say, but there was a lot of history available out there. He was a professor at the University of Georgia, where my father was born. And then I did a novel about Detroit again called Motor City Burning in 2014 about the rebellion in the summer of '67. It's a crime story. A cop is chasing the guy who killed the 43rd victim, the 43rd person who died during the disturbance, and it's still unsolved to this day. And I just made up a story about a guy who maybe who shot the woman dead. So that was called Motor City Burning, and then we have the Lions book, The Lions Finally Roar. So that's my career in a nutshell.
Wow,
And
that's
yeah,
a
so
pretty
it's
big nutshell. Then very
yeah,
good.
it's a big nutshell, but it's so 3 fiction books and 3 nonfiction books.
I'm hoping that maybe your next book will be called Super Lions, because
Superline. Well, maybe they'll
they
win the
go to the
Super
Super
Bowl.
Bowl.
If they win the Super Bowl, I have to dust this thing off and add a little coda at the end. It did come out with a paperback last year, a year after the publication of the book, in which I included their 2025 season when they went 15-2, and got bounced out of the playoffs real fast. And I interviewed that woman I was mentioning earlier, Megan Stefanski. I traveled up to Detour, and that was the end of the book. The fact that she won, and they had another disappointment at the end of that season. But like you say, maybe they're going to win a Super Bowl one day, and I'll have to get back out there and roll up my sleeves and write a new coda to this book. And we'll have him.
Definitely. And his dad, Donnie, owned a restaurant in the Upper Peninsula, and he what we call a super duper youper.
Yep. Oh, did you know Donnie?
I didn't know him personally, but I followed him, and every time he was sitting there,
Yeah.
and every time they showed him his seat, and he had his favorite seat where he sat with
Yep.
Megan, and people I know in the Upper Peninsula went, of course, to his restaurant and got to meet him.
When I was up there, they sold it off and closed it down. I stopped and looked in the window, and the place was just empty. And it used to be full of Lions memorabilia, and it was like a shrine. And I've seen pictures of it, but I never saw it in its glory days. But apparently, it was quite an attraction back when
Oh yeah.
Donnie was still
Oh
with
yeah.
us.
Anybody who went to the Upper Peninsula would pop in there and see all the things he had. Autographs from players. He had so much.
Yeah.
He typifies the Lions fans who go like he would drive hundreds of miles just for a game, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Every Sunday, he'd drive down from the UP. That's a fan right there, right?
Exactly, exactly. Bill, I think it's a wonderful book. I always recommend it as the perfect gift for anybody. They will all enjoy reading this book about the Lions, and it gives
You,
people hope.
PatZi, I just realized I'm wearing a Honolulu blue shirt here. I didn't even think about it when I put it on, but it's pretty close to the Lions blue, so that's a nice touch, right?
Oh, yes, it is. I thought that's why you did it.
No, I'm not that sharp. I wasn't thinking. It's just one of my favorite shirts, so I put it on. Thanks for having me. It's always fun talking with you.
Joy to talk to you. And I do promotions for you for weeks before Thanksgiving Day. I will be talking about it, and it's a great Christmas gift.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much joy because using your father's memories and all that he did and all that you did, it's just a fantastic book. So, Bill Morris,
Well,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much for joining me today. And we're going to keep promoting your wonderful book. And we'll probably have you on sometime, maybe around Christmas again, just to do another promotion, okay?
Okay, I'm always available. Thank you so much, PatZi.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye now. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.